All right. Good morning. Thank you for staying here and coming to this final session. Do appreciate that. So we're working out some kinks in our development setup here. Some of the orgs that we generated for this class are not there. So what I would like you to do is this. The way the org login works is everybody should have a handout. And at the top of the handout is a username and a password. The username is admin@df11patternsb and then 3 hash symbols. Replace the hash symbols with the number that's on your laptop or next to your desk if you're in the back 2 rows. The password is df2011. The username is... Okay. The username was wrong. The orgs are there. All right, that's the latest. All right, here's what you got to do then. There's a slight change to the username. It's admin@df11apexpatterns. So insert the word apex after df11, sorry. You still need the B. Oh, it's even on our slide. Okay. All right. We shot ourselves in the foot. All right. So here's your username. So replace the hash symbol with the number that's next to your laptop. Yeah, good point. Make sure you write it down on your exercise guide. Now we will be distributing the PowerPoints on the session record in the the Dreamforce app. I'll post those over the next couple of days as a PDF. But so if you don't catch everything that's on the slides, you will be able to print those out later. But so it's admin@df11apexpatternsb number.com df2011 is the password. So each of you gets your own org. You get your own org. You're the administrator. Once you log in, if you want to change the password, it's yours. Change the email address so you can log in from another IP range, and that org is yours for 30 days. So all the code we're going to do in this session, you get to take home and copy, paste, or extract out of this org and reuse. So we've got some good stuff here, especially the final exercise. It's got some nice reusable code we're going to look at. Okay, so let's do a redo. All right, here we are. So this is our session. Introduction to Force.com code, otherwise known as Apex, patterns for developers. My name is John Henning. Welcome. I'm a technical evangelist here at Salesforce. For a couple of years, I was a technical instructor. Some of you may have been in my 501 class. Welcome. And helping me is Mr. Will Giamone. He's a senior curriculum developer with us, and he develops a lot of our curriculum for our Apex classes and sessions. So he'll be my driver, or safe harbor. I don't know if you've never seen this before, but here it is. I don't think I'm going to be talking about anything that's not released yet. So it probably won't apply, but I will clearly state if something is not available now that it's a future enhancement if anything comes to mind. Again, our login, which hopefully everybody is logged in. If you're not logged in or you're having problems, we do have some experts in the room hovering around, looking over your shoulders and watching. If you have a problem, just flag one of them down and they'll help you out so that you can keep up. Okay. So this is a great session. We did this a couple days ago, and this is Apex patterns. Now, here's your choice. This is a hands-on training session, so you can type the code and kind of fill in some of the to-dos as we go. Or if you just want to watch, you can watch. We'll also be doing all the exercises. If you just want to sit back and watch him do that and then do the exercise later, because you'll have the org and you'll have all the code. Oh, you know what we forgot to do, Will, is download the starter code. So go back to your browser, and after you log in, go to the Documents tab, and click on the Documents tab. And so we don't have enough time in 50 minutes to type everything, so we provide some starter code for you. So it's really this prerequisite that is part of the first beginning, before exercise 1. Go to the Documents tab, go to My Personal Documents, and there's some lab files there. You need to download those right now to your hard drive and extract them. So save them to your hard drive and extract them to your desktop or to your C drive or whatever we have there on those laptops. And there's going to be a couple of subfolders in there. There's one called Exercises and one called Solutions. So if you want to complete the exercises as we go and complete the to-dos, you're going to use the files in the Exercises folder. And when we get there, I'll point that out. If you don't want to type code, you just want to paste the answer in and get it running, we've got the Solutions classes and triggers in the Solutions folder. Okay, so that's your choice. Okay, so let's go back to our agenda. So we're going to talk about Apex patterns, and we're actually going to look at 3 of them specifically. The first one is bulk caching. So this is kind of one of those basic patterns you have to know with Apex. And then we're going to look at pagination. A lot of requests we get is, gee, you know, looking at a form with 1 row is easy. How do I browse through a large record set and be able to browse back and forth and traverse a large record set on a page? And then we're going to look at exercise 3, which is really awesome. We've got some nice reusable code where we kind of put a page that uses pagination, but it's on steroids. It's going to have search and sort capability, and it's going to be a reusable design pattern that you can take home and use now in your production org. And I think Cliff McCurder, who built this exercise, he's not here today, but he also posted on the session record in the Dreamforce app unit tests for that code as well, which of course you've got to have unit tests to deploy it. And then at the end, we'll save about 10 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes for Q&A. All right. So, patterns. What are patterns? Well, if you've been doing software development for a while, design patterns is nothing new. But just a quick 5-second description. What is a pattern? A pattern is simply a template or an approach to solving a business requirement or a design or a problem that you have in your code. And so a pattern itself, a lot of times, is not the code. A pattern can really be applied to multiple languages. A pattern is really just an approach to solving a problem. And design patterns in software became popular in the early 90s and have really become sort of a de facto standard in building large enterprise-level applications. And we have a bunch of design patterns that our global services team and folks that are out there in the field building applications have built over the years because of this sort of repetitive requirements that are out there. Bulk processing, complex workflow, transaction management, page control, wizards, those kind of things. And so there's a number of approaches you can take, but you can take the same approach across multiple applications. Doesn't really necessarily mean the code will be exactly the same, but the structure or the approach to solving that requirement will be the same. So we're going to look at 2 of these. We're going to look at bulk processing, and we're going to look at pagination. So bulk caching, why do I need to do this? Well, you guys have probably heard about our governor limits. So our governor limits are throttles, basically, on a transactional level that keeps an Apex transaction from going haywire, exceeding too many resources. And so what we have to do is we have to learn how to write our code to not exceed these limits. And one of the ways we do this is through a technique called caching. So we collect keys. Let's say, here's our scenario. We're going to look at a slide next here, but here's our scenario. In my trigger, you remember a trigger doesn't fire once per row of data, does it? Let's say I upload 100 rows of data through data loader, the trigger really only fires once. That collection of 100 rows of data is sent to my trigger, and my trigger processes that 100 rows. So let's say I'm processing 100 rows of data inside of my trigger, and on that data, let's say it's a lead, I want to do a lookup in another table and persist some of that data on that other table on my lead before it's actually inserted. So for each row, 100 times I need to do a lookup. Well, we can't do 100 lookups or 200 lookups using SOQL, can we? Okay? We've got to come up with a different way to do this. So we always look at caching keys into our collection variables when we're doing bulk processing. So we're gonna walk through an example and then try it out. So let's go to the next slide. So here's our design pattern for doing lookups on a related or even an unrelated table. It's collect, query, cache, and lookup. So we're going to start from the bottom of this slide. Here's my collection of leads in trigger.new. Okay? Somebody's just inserted 4 leads with a name and zip. And what I want to do is, for each zip code, I want to do a lookup in a custom table to get the city and state. So I can put the city and state on the lead before the lead is committed. So what we do is we first iterate through trigger.new and we collect the zip codes. We put them in a set. Okay? Then the next step is to do a query. And the query is not going to query for each zip code. It's going to do a query with the in clause. So see where it says select name, city, state from zip code, which is my custom object, where name in zip codes, which is my set. So it's one query, but it's going to retrieve all of the zip code lookup rows just for those zips that are in trigger.new. Then I'm going to load that information in a map. So that map becomes my in-memory lookup record set for those zip codes that I want to use to do a lookup. So I load the zip code objects into a map where the map has a key and a value. The key is the zip code. The value is the zip code object, which is going to include my city and state. Then I can iterate through trigger.new, and then for each zip, instead of going out to my database and doing a query for each zip, I'm doing a get out of my map. Okay, so that's what we're going to do next. So you can see how instead of doing 4 queries, we're doing 1 query. But we have to do some pre-processing ahead of time. We collect the keys, put them in a set, we query the object we want, and then we iterate, and we load that into a map, and then we iterate through trigger.new and do lookups in the map. So that's what we're going to do first. Let's try it out. This is exercise 1, so exercise 1 in your exercise guide. We're going to walk you through this example. First thing we're going to do is go to Setup, Customize, Leads, and Triggers. So we're going to create a new trigger on the lead object. And so remember, we're not using the IDE here just because, normally I would never program using the browser because if you close the browser, you'd lose everything you were doing. You'd use the IDE. But for this classroom setting, it's just a little easier. So bear with us here. We're going to use our browser editor, so click New. And to make it a little easier as well, we're going to actually paste in some starter code. So this is where that downloaded files comes into play. Okay, so you're going to go back to your folder and find the file called citystatelookup.trigger.txt. You're going to copy that entire thing, and then you're going to paste it into the new trigger that you're creating. And you can follow along here with Will. So, Will, if you could just blow that up a little bit with the font a couple times, that's good. And then scroll up to the top. So we can see line 1 here in my trigger. It's on the lead, and it's going to execute before or the insert and before the update. And look at line 3. That is my set that I've defined. It's going to store all those zip codes. So the first thing we're going to do in lines 4 through 9 is we're going to iterate through the trigger.new, which is all those leads that are about to be inserted, and we're going to collect the zip code. And so you have a to-do there after line 7, and that is to add the zip code from the lead into the set. So zipcodes.add, and it's lead.postal code. So we're collecting all the zip codes from the leads that are about to be inserted. And once we've collected all those zip codes, we put them into a set. Now you can see in line 12, we're making sure that it's not empty, and then we're defining a map in line 13. So a map is a key value pair collection. So my key is going to be a string, and the value is going to be a zip code object, and we're just going to call that cache map. Okay. So what we're going to do to populate cache map is I have to retrieve the zip code records that I want to use for my lookup. So to do that, we're going to use a for loop with a SOQL query. So we can see our for zip code with a local name of zip, and then within, and then we have some brackets there already. The brackets are already there. All you have to do is inside of those brackets put a SOQL query. And the SOQL query is going to be select ID, name, city, _C, state, _C from our zip code. Where name, now name is our standard name field, which is actually contains a zip code in that custom object. In, so that's key. That is the important point of this SOQL query is that in clause. So I'm saying grab all the zip code objects for the zip codes that are in my set, because I'm going to need the city and state from those zip codes. And then we're going to iterate through that, and further down underneath the if zips not null, so I've got an object back, I'm actually going to do a put and put that object into a map. So now we've loaded up our lookup table. It's basically our in-memory lookup table called cache map. So we're putting all those zip codes in there. Now we're ready to actually do the lookup. So I have the zip code in memory, and it's in my cache map. Now we can see further down to look up city and state by zip. So we've got a for lead object within trigger.new. Now here's where I can do my lookup. And how do we do a lookup in a map? Just do a get using the key. So we're just going to retrieve that zip object using the zip code off trigger.new, which is our lead. And then finally, we have our final to-do here is we're going to take that zip object and assign the city from the zip object to the city on the lead, and assign the state from the zip object and assign it to the state on the lead. So this is really best practice. So basically, it's a simplified example, but whenever you are going to design a trigger that's going to be retrieving data from other objects, always want to collect and cache. Okay, query using in clause. That's the basic design here. Okay, because what will happen is that you will exceed your SOQL query limit if you don't do that. So go ahead and click Save, and we've got everything typed in correctly. We're good to go, and we can test it. And we can test it by just going and creating a new lead. So go to the Leads tab, click New. And I believe the zip code table was pre-populated with all the zip codes, so I think you're pretty safe to create or use any zip code you like. And hopefully, if it works, our trigger should populate the city and state. Now again, we're testing, just one row. So it's testing the functionality. It's not really, testing our bulkification. So you'd want to write a unit test that creates a couple hundred rows of leads and then does an insert of a collection of 200 rows to make sure that it's working properly. Okay? That's our first example. All right, let's move on. Pagination. So this is a really common requirement in an application, is to have a page in which it displays multiple rows. So there's a very easy technique to create a page with multiple rows, similar to a list view page, right? And so we're going to create that. And the first example of that, we don't even have to write any Apex, because there's this class in our class library called standard set controller that we can attach to our Visualforce page. And so that's what we're going to do. So let's go to the next slide. So our standard set controller, why do we want to do this? Well, basically, we don't want to load a Visualforce page with 50,000 rows of data, right? Because we'll blow out our view state or something will break, right? So this is all about performance, right? Just paginating through 20, 30 rows at a time, giving your users a responsive page. Okay? So we're going to use the standard set controller. Standard set controller is a part of our Apex Pages class, and I don't even have to write any code to use it. It's sort of built in. So one of the things I tell students when I teach the 501 class is, yes, a custom object is like a database table conceptually, but it's like a database table on steroids because you get other stuff with an object. And one of the things you get with a custom object, really all objects, is a standard controller and a standard set controller that you don't have to write. Okay? All you have to do is define it in the page tag of your Visualforce page. So we're going to try that just to kind of show you the basics first. One thing I forgot to mention, the standard set controller, since it does pagination, it has some standard methods already built in that you don't have to code. So the first goes to the first set of 20 rows. Last goes to the last set of 20 rows in your data set. Next and previous, just paginates. So those are all there. It also has a result size as well, a couple other properties you can use. So we're going to try it out. So this is exercise 2. Adding pagination. So here we're just going to code a little Visualforce. Okay, so we're going to create a little Visualforce page. So you're going to go to Setup, Develop Pages, and click New. And we're going to create a page called Page Accounts. And you're going to paste in some starter code. We're going to delete the congratulatory HTML header, really everything, and completely replace the standard start page with one that's in this file, pageaccounts.page.txt. Paste that whole thing in. You're going to have a little typing to do, but you can copy-paste a little bit of it. Notice in line 1, if you can blow that up a little bit, Will, line 1, our page tag, right? Every Visualforce page is wrapped in a page tag. And we have an attribute called standard controller, and so we're going to be using the account object. And then notice the next attribute, record set var. Whenever the platform sees the record set var attribute, it knows that this page is going to be processing a set of data. And it's going to use the standard set controller. And you can actually, that value for that attribute, it says accounts, that could really be anything you want. It's more like an alias, and that alias represents the set of data that is about to be bound to your page block table. So I could put my accounts or John's accounts or whatever you want. There's really doesn't have to match anything as long as you use it down below in your page block table. So we can see in line 10, our page block table where we're going to display those accounts. We've got our binding in the value attribute. So we're binding that result set to our page block table. And that is that variable name that we used up in the record set var. And then we have another var attribute there in page block table. And that var attribute is a variable that represents each row. So we're simply going to add some, some additional links here to take advantage of some of the methods that are part of the standard set controller. So in the to-do, let's see here, where's our to-do? It's right inside of, we've got a couple comments, pagination controls. So after the to-do comment, we're going to add output text. So this is step 1F. So the output text this is nice. We're just going to display a property called result size. So the result size is really the total number of rows that exist in your org. It's not just the number that are on the page. It's the total number of rows that exist in the org. So this is automatically computed and returned to you. So we're going to do a value equal and then binding the result size. And then we're going to add some links. Now you're going to have to type the first link, but my recommendation is once you type the first one, just copy paste it for the other three and then just change the method names. So we're adding a link for some of the other methods, the action methods that are part of the standard set controller. So we're adding an action called first. And then we're doing something fancy here where we've got this rendered attribute to say, has previous. Well, what is has previous? Well, has previous is another property of the standard set controller that returns a true or false, telling you if you have any previous rows, depending on where you've paginated. And so we can use that value that returns a true or false and use it in the rendered attribute so that that link is rendered or not rendered. So if there isn't any previous data, I don't want the previous link to show up, right? So we're hiding it if there aren't any previous. So we're just going to add those. We'll just copy paste that command link for the previous, next, and last. You're copy paste challenged. So now to test it, once you guys are done typing that in, looks like we're on NA12. I think the instructions test your page. It says I'll give you some instructions here in a sec. Yeah, so we've got has previous on the first two links, has next on the second two links, and the action methods are first, previous, next, last, and the labels first, previous, next, last. So we basically built a list view page that's a custom list view page. All right, so let's do a quick save, see how we're doing. Open quote is for attribute value. Let's see. Oh yeah, line 7. Thank you. Good eye. All right. Okay. So now to test this, we're just going to cheat a little bit. So go to your Home tab. I don't think it's really spelled out in the, just says to navigate to Apex page accounts. Go to your Home tab. That's the easy way. And then up in your URL box, just backspace over everything till you get to the .com/ and then put Apex/page accounts. And then hit enter. So there's our page. Ah, yeah. That's all right. Okay. So we've got a page that paginates. Now, this is really cool, but it doesn't really give us a lot of options as far as your end user is concerned. I mean, it's just, yeah, here's everything that's in the table, right? Here's everything that's in the object. You can't sort. You can't, select what you want. You have no control over, what's being displayed. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to, here's our money exercise coming up. It's really good stuff. We're going to, why don't you show me the slides again, Will, and go back to that screenshot of the page. And I just want to point out a couple things, about 3 or 4. There we go. Notice the screenshot here. There's a search box with a search button, and there's also across, right underneath it, there's like a previous next arrow, and it tells you how much you're on page 1 of 11 of 104 records. And then if you you can't do this, it's a screenshot and it's PowerPoint, but you'll be able to click on the header column and sort the row or the page based on which column you click on. So the one we just built doesn't do any of that. The one we're going to do, we're going to add all that functionality. Okay? So let's go back to the exercise. Search and sort. There we go. That's what we're going to do. We're going to allow users to apply a search criteria and a column sort. So, they bring up the page that says, oh, you got, 30,000 accounts. Well, I only want to see the ones that say IBM or something like that, right? And I want to sort them for a specific zip code or something like that. This is a functionality that I want to do not just for accounts, but I might want to have that same kind of a user-defined list view for leads or maybe a custom object. I don't want to have to rewrite it and rebuild it from scratch every time. So what we've done is we provided you a design here. If you go to the next slide, and this is, I'm going to spend a couple minutes here. This is our design pattern. Okay, and this is really neat because we're doing a few things in this code that we're going to look at after we complete the exercise. We'll review the code. But basically, we're using inheritance. So we have a class called dynamic set controller. So everything in that dark blue box, that's reusable. That's reusable code. And dynamic set controller is in there. And dynamic set controller is a virtual class. So in Apex, all your classes are final by default. So if you want to extend a class, you have to use the virtual keyword on the declaration of the class. So it's a virtual class, so it's a base class. Then account list controller, this is my implementation of that class for accounts. Okay, I can have lead list controller, whatever list controller. And so I'm going to extend the dynamic set controller. So we'll look at that code in a sec. And also, the dynamic set controller is actually simply a delegator for the standard set controller, which is part of our library. So we're inside of the dynamic set controller, we're actually instantiating a standard set controller. So I don't have to write a first and a next and a last and a previous method. I'm simply going to use the ones that are built into the system. But we want to have some other logic to specify which rows of data I'm paginating through. And that's what the dynamic set controller does. And so we've got a couple other neat things we do here as well. We've got a component for the paginator, the arrows across the top, previous, next, last. That's a separate Visualforce component, and we've got a sort header so I can implement which columns I want on my account or lead or whatever object I'm implementing, which columns I want to be sortable. So we have a component for that as well. And what's really neat is these components, so Visualforce components can have their own controllers. But here's a really neat thing we're doing here is that these components don't have their own controllers. They're actually getting a reference passed to it of the page controller class. So everything's using the same controller. So it really makes it a nice reusable framework. So we're going to look at this. So let's go to the exercise and walk through this code. So this is exercise 3. First thing we're going to do is create a new class. So go to Setup, Develop, Apex Classes, and click New. And then we're going to paste in some code here. Account list controller.cls.text is the file we want. And if you could blow that up for a second, we want to look at this. This is really cool because we're going to add a couple lines here, and then we'll talk about it. So step 1D, our first to do, is we're going to call the parent class constructor. So we can see line 2 here, public account list controller. That's our constructor for this controller class. But what we're going to do is we're going to actually call the constructor of our base class, which we use the super keyword for that. So it's super, and then we put in it. Now the dynamic set controller has a constructor in it that accepts an argument. That argument is a string. And this is where I'm implementing a specific object type here by specifying my query against accounts. So we're passing that string into the constructor to the dynamic set controller class. We'll look at that in a second. And then we've got one method here. That method is getAccount, so it's a getter method that returns a list of accounts. So what are we going to do? We're going to add return, and then since all of those classes and the components that were in that blue box I showed you, nowhere in that code does it talk about accounts, right? Because it's got to be reusable, so it's going to use S objects. So it's going to query and pass S objects back to the class that it's extending. The class that's extending the base class. So here, my getRecords is calling a method called getRecords, and it's casting the list of S objects that it's getting back from my base class, and it's casting it into a list of accounts. Then I can just bind this list to the page block table on my page. So go ahead and save that. So that's it. There's what, like 13 lines of code counting, indentation and white space. That's all you need to reuse that framework. Now we need a page, of course, so we're going to create a page. So step 2, I'm going to go to Setup, Develop Pages, click New, and we're going to call it Search Accounts. Search Accounts. And we're going to replace that with the searchaccounts.page.text. All right, now this has got a little bit of code in it because this is what is displaying to our end user. So blow that up just a little bit, Will. And so notice in line 1, now we're not using standard controller anymore. We're using a custom controller. So we're using that class that we just created. That is the controller class for this page. And we're going to add a couple of things here. So we've got a to-do where it says Add Search Filter. So this is inside of our page block. So the page block is that grid that we're going to display. And we're going to put in a command button for search and an input text for name search field. Now, nowhere in our controller class did we see an action method called search or a field called account search field? Well, that's because those exist in our base class, right? We've extended a base class. So all that functionality is built into the base class. But of course, since we extended it, it's available to us. And then we've got another to-do down where it says add sort header. This is a great example of a facet. So this is step 2E. So what we're doing is, so a facet, if you're not familiar with facets, is many of our Visualforce components have this thing called a facet. And a facet is an area, usually the header, body, or footer, that you can override with other components. And so we're overriding the header facet of a column, and we're actually going to plunk a component into the header. And that component is that functionality that allows the user to click on the column and it will resort the result set based on that click. Well, all of that functionality is built into a component. So we can see here we're adding C:\sort header. So sort header is the name of my Visualforce component. And look what we're doing here. We've got an attribute called sController. That's just a custom attribute. You could have called it anything you want. But it's passing in a property called controller. So we're going to remember that, put that, check that off in your head for a second. We're going to come back to that. We're going to go look to see what that is. Well, let me tell you what it is. We'll see how it's coded. It's actually passing a reference to the controller class or the controller object, right? So basically, we're passing the reference to the search list or accounts list controller into the component. That's really cool. I didn't even know you could do that until Cliff wrote this code. I'm like, wow, that's really neat. So I don't have to have a controller class for my component. I'm just passing in a reference to the page controller. And so there's some other things there too. We've got a header name column and a panel. It's using a specific panel. So that's our facet. Now, click Save. Hopefully, if we didn't miss any quotes or anything, we're good to go. Oh, let's see. What did we miss? Just wrong symbol. All right. Unknown property, search account list controller. Oh, what did you call the class? Oh, the property. Gotcha. All these people debugging for us. We're crowdsourcing the debugging. Yeah, it's great. Should all take the certification exam together. Okay, let's try it out. So go to your Home tab and go up to the URL box on your browser, backspace over everything up to the .com/apex, and then search accounts. Then hit enter. And there's our beautiful page. So we've got the ability to sort by clicking on the name column. That's the only one we added that functionality to. We have the previous next icons. We have a page size. We have the page 2 of 7 functionality. All of that functionality you didn't even have to write. It was all, we wrote it for you. It's reusable. But this is a really great design pattern that we've actually implemented for you with Apex code. Okay? That's what you should see. So if I wanted to use this with leads, I would simply create a leads page with a leads list controller that extends my base class, right? Change the super constructor to use lead instead of account. Change the get accounts to get leads and cast it into leads instead of accounts. And you're done. So let's look at some of the code and just show you how we've implemented some of this. Let's go to the dynamic set controller in the Apex classes. So that was already loaded in there. You guys are probably already looking at it. Let's open that up in edit mode and then blow it up a little bit. So notice in line 1, the class declaration, we're using the virtual keyword, right? Because in order to extend this class, I need to have that. And then I've got this thing called Apex Pages Standard Set Controller. Why am I doing that? Well, if you scroll down to, there's a method called next previous. Scroll down about halfway, you'll see them. There we go. There's first, previous, next. All we're doing is we're using that standard set controllers like the delegator. We're exposing those methods to our class that's extending this. And this, we didn't reinvent the wheel. We were simply using the standard set controller. Now, how does the standard set controller know what rows it wants? Well, if you go back up, Will, to the top where we have our constructors, there's our constructor class in line 7. Right? So here's our constructor dynamic list controller. So when we call super, this is what's running, right? We're passing in the base query, and that base query is being used, and then we're calling the query method, which is right below it. The query method is also going to take the where clause, so if somebody had typed in a search argument in the search box, it's going to capture it in the where clause, and then create the string. And then scroll down a little bit, Will, in line 22. Okay, really important here. What we're doing is we're actually scroll over just a hair more. There's our query string. We're passing it into the getQueryLocator, part of the database class. That is the basically, what's giving you control over the data that the standard set controller is using. Okay? So we're specifying a query string, calling the getQueryLocator, which returns a server-side cursor called the QueryLocator object. Returns it to the standard set controller, and so that's giving us that ability to have a server-side cursor that's giving us an efficient pagination control. It's the QueryLocator object. Okay? Now, one more thing I want to show you. There should be a property called controller. Or get controller, I think. Here it is, way at the bottom, of course. Remember in our component, we had an attribute called sController equal curly bang controller. And I said we're passing in a reference to the pages controller class. This is what's doing it. So we have a getter here called getController. That's what we're binding to, is that controller method. And then we're doing a return this. The this attribute, or the this keyword, is returning a reference to itself, which is the controller class, to the component. Then the component can use any of these methods as well, right? So the component can call any of these methods. So this is how we get the Visualforce components that are on the page to use the controller that the page is using by passing in a reference through a custom attribute. Let's look at the sort components. So go to the develop components. Yeah, develop components. And then let's look at sort header. And then go into edit mode and blow it up a little bit. So notice this component does not have a controller class, but it's got a custom attribute called sController. And notice in this line 8, I've got a link. This is my sort, right? And I'm calling a sort action method that's defined in my base class. So how cool is that? Okay, so that's how we can make it reusable. The components don't refer to accounts. The base class, that's all reusable code. And of course, the base class as well, if you look through the dynamic set controller, is using S-objects. So S-object is a base class for all of our standard and custom objects. That's what makes it. It's dynamic DML, we call it. Dynamic Apex is dynamic SOCL. Okay? All right. Let's go to the next slide. So, key takeaways for today: bulk caching. It's a must-know topic. You need to know it. Okay, you need to do it. Pagination, again, the standard set controller. It's sort of those unsung heroes of our system library that people forget about. And using S-object and some of the techniques of extending base classes, passing in parameters into the constructor using the super keyword, and then also using components and passing in the reference to the base class via custom attribute. Great techniques for you to use as well, not just for pagination, but for other approaches as well. Okay? Next slide. So what's next? If you could, on your Home tab, and if you open up the sidebar, there's a course survey link. If you could kindly fill out that survey, it'll open up a little window, and it's just 5 quick questions. We really appreciate your feedback, and we track to make sure that we're presenting topics that are valuable to you, and that it was relevant information for next year and for all of our training. Do appreciate that. And I will be, we have about 7 minutes or so left for Q&A in here. There'll be people with microphones. Also, if you have additional questions, I'm going to be just right over here in what we call Customer Success West, which is some little round tables about 30 feet away, if we have more extended questions. So yes, first question.
This is a really wonderful set of patterns which you just talked about. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, obviously there are more such patterns.
Yes.
What's the best way to get to those?
So, you know, I knew this would be asked. So I've been talking to our developer evangelists, like, where do we go for other patterns? There is no such place. So what I can recommend to you right now is the workbook. So developer.force.com, there's a workbook that has some, not necessarily patterns, but some common use cases and solutions for, you know, common, you know, situations. I don't know if I'd call them all patterns, but they're close. I'm also talking to our developer evangelists to create an area on the developer site that talks about patterns, and where we can get stuff from the guys in the field that do this over and over. They're the guys that are generating these patterns, right? They're the ones that see this day in and day out. That there's a huge need for it, and so hopefully sometime this year we'll start publishing more on this topic. Okay. Anybody else have a question? Over here, just the microphone.
If I create a sites page with that data grid on it, will that sites page display it well? I mean,
oh, sure. Sites is simply Visualforce, right?
Okay, cool.
So, yep, definitely. Yes.
Hello. I saw caching right on a page level, but what if you want to cache an object across HTTP requests?
So what you can do is, let's say, that's like our wizard design pattern, right? You've got a multi-step pages, right, where you have step 1, fill this out, go to step 2, fill this out, and you want to cache that information. So in that case, what you would do is you would actually use one controller class. So if you have multiple pages with one controller class, it's going to cache that in your view state, and it's going to pass that information back and forth to each page in view state. So you do have to be careful if you don't cache too much. View state does have a size limit. It's like 256K, something like that. But yeah, that's what you would do.
But what if you want something to be cached across your application? Like you have something like a user agent or something you want to keep, or something like instead of just under one controller.
So we have something called custom settings. Now, custom settings is a static data store, similar to like a custom object, but it's actually higher performance because it's cached. So you could create a custom setting, populate it, and then that can be used across multiple users, right? Anybody else have any questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. I hope you guys had a good time at Dreamforce and learned a lot. And we'll see you next year. Safe travels home.